Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you back to the pavilion for an extraordinarily, in my judgment, important topic, ocean observations for breakthrough climate action. Those of you that were present here for the previous session, where we had a number of Pacific Island nations leaders talking about how Pacific is a third of the world's ocean and what it means to them and what it should mean to the rest of the world in terms of its attempt to solve the climate crisis. The outline of the panel, but before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Kelapurthi Ramakrishna. I'm from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I direct the Marine Policy Center at the institution. We have a great panel of scholars who have been steeped in this from a variety of angles. I'm going to introduce them shortly. But what it is what we're trying to discuss in this panel is the role of the ocean in our shared climate future and how the role it can potentially play on marine carbon dioxide removal, the blue economy, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and of course sea level rise. There is another very important panel taking place tomorrow on that topic. So these are just some of the ways it could help or hinder human security and prosperity. I have the honor of being the chair of the advisory group of the Seabed 2030. And one of the things that we were trying to address in that was, well, we're trying to map the ocean floor, but what does it mean to countries? Why should they care? And when you dig deep into it, you get all kinds of answers, and suddenly you realize how vital it is. And in many senses, ocean observations is like that. And so with that introduction, let me say that we have 4 panelists, and they're going to each speak for a few minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes, and then there is a conversation between them on a number of questions, and then we will open it up for your questions. Let me start with Vladimir Ryabinin, until recently executive head of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, to speak first, and then we'll go down that list. You could speak from there or from here, whichever you like, or you can take this.
So many thanks, Rama. I hope you hear me, but I do hear it myself, so it should be working. So first of all, and I think this the purpose of this panel and the discussion is to really think about the role of ocean observations for the future of climate. And there is one thing that not very many people know, that we are here to some extent because of the ocean observations. The Conference of Parties of Convention on Climate in 2015, 21st, that came up with the Paris Agreement, was discussing things during a very difficult time for climate, because during that time there was a hiatus in global warming, in the surface warming. And it was through the Argo flows that it was possible to show that the heat started to go to the deeper part of the ocean. So the warming was continuing. It was just going deeper, and because of that, it was not so apparent on the surface. And many deniers wanted to use that hiatus to basically abandon the process, but it was not, because ocean science showed what was happening in the ocean. So observing the ocean is technically difficult, more difficult than observing the atmosphere, because radio waves are basically not transparent for water. We can basically scan the whole atmosphere from the top to the bottom and understand what is happening there in terms of humidity, wind, and even visual surface, visual information. But in the ocean, it's impossible. And the second thing is, ocean is 71% area of the planet. But the scale of things that are happening in the ocean, the eddies, meanders, it's much smaller than cyclones and anticyclones in the atmosphere. Because of that, we need high resolution data. But we have less observations in the ocean than we have in the atmosphere. There is one thing that actually helps a little bit in this particular case, because um, uh, uh, temporal scale of variability in the ocean are longer. Ocean is more predictable in that sense. Because of that, the approaches to design a global ocean observing system are a little bit different. So I started to work on this in 1993 and was part of the design of the first version of the global ocean observing system. Then we were discussing already physical, biogeochemical, biological variables. And now the system is as it is now, around 120,000 observations per day, 2,000 networks and things like this. Still, there are big issues. One issue is that it is very difficult to make observations in the exclusive economic zone, real-time observations, and we are trying to understand how it is possible to address it. The conventional law of the sea does not have enough provisions for that. On top of that, but in addition to this, we have the World Meteorological Organization, which is the United Nations Convention on 1947. So it may open certain possibilities of making vital observations for safety of people. So, and basically, I would like to say that now, after 30 years of the design of the global ocean observing system, we, for the first time in the history, understand what needs to be done with it. So there is an overall paradigm that we need to start managing the ocean sustainably. And for that, we are going to have a set of goals. The goals will be related to climate, biodiversity, ocean economy, safety of people, including sea level rise and things like this. So they all require certain types of observations. And several networks are able to provide more observations that are more useful than other observations. So for us, there is an objective method to design the global ocean observing system. This was for the first time done when we created the framework for ocean observations that was guiding the development of the global ocean observing system. By the way, global ocean observing system is an investment of the order of 500 millions into sustainability. And what is missing, I think, in the pot, the big observations are in the polar ocean, in the deep ocean, also some observations of the surface, including waves, that are critical for tropical cyclone prediction, because the amplitude, the intensity of tropical cyclones is not predicted as well as possible. And then, of course, biogeochemical and biological observations. There is a sequence of kind of moving forward with maturity of different observing systems. But if we continue designing observing system, take into account the final goal of managing the ocean in terms of climate, biodiversity, sustainably, then the whole picture should be also involving data assimilation in the ocean. And with that data assimilation, using all kinds of observations to generate maximum useful information, will be able to basically change the paradigm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. I think you really set the stage for the other speakers to follow on with you. Now, may I invite Professor Margaret Leinen, Director of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and most importantly, one of the grand thinkers behind this Ocean Pavilion. Margaret, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rama. I'd like to talk a little bit, Vladimir talked to you about the overall framing of the big ocean systems that the big ocean observing systems that we have. I'd like to focus more on what we observe and what some new developments are in that. So as we talk about systems like Argo, they've focused on the physical characteristics of the ocean, and now in the last 5 to 10 years, the biogeochemistry of the ocean. But there's some new developments in physics that are coming up with sensors that will be enormous additions to these basic parameters. One of them is turbulence. Everything that mixes in the ocean depends on turbulence and the scales of turbulence in the ocean. If there's an event in the ocean, a chemical event in the ocean, it mixes through turbulence. And new turbulence sensors now exist that we've been able to measure turbulence in the past, but we haven't been able to put sensors on moorings or on long-term instruments because the turbulence sensors would drift. And new developments in this have given us turbulence sensors that are stable and are now being designed for addition to the Argo floats. This is going to allow us not just to see the distribution of things and properties, but it's going to help us understand how they get to the distribution that they have. A second critical piece are the sensors that tell us about the carbon system in the ocean. The carbon system is the most complicated chemical system on the planet. And in the ocean, we have only for about a decade been able to measure the pH of the ocean. But that has given us great insights that have allowed us to look at processes like acidification of the ocean in much greater detail than we did in the past. But we have been talking all week about marine carbon dioxide removal and in the ocean, and how we're going to be able to monitor marine carbon dioxide removal. We do not have the ability to do that right now from moorings, Argo floats, or anything else, because the carbon system in the ocean requires 3 variables to define, and we only measure 2. The third one is alkalinity, and there is no alkalinity sensor yet. There are 2 or 3 teams around the world that are working on developing an alkalinity sensor, and this is going to be essential for us to say if we are experimenting with marine carbon dioxide removal, that we have measured that and we can verify that we have actually removed carbon. Another big development is in biology. So most of our biological observations are observations that we have had to work very, very hard to get because most of our biological observations are photographic observations or acoustics. So we have, and especially in the deep ocean, that means that we have to put a camera platform or a remotely operated vehicle or a human occupied vehicle down to take pictures to be able to say something about the biology. The revolution in genomics that has given us new ways to look at segments of DNA has given us metabarcoding, metagenomics, and now environmental DNA to be able to add to our ability to look at the biology of the ocean. And that's based on the fact that every organism in the ocean releases its DNA into the water, either by excreting it, by sloughing off cells like the mucus on fish, or by dying and releasing the DNA into the ocean. And we now know that that DNA is stable for about 2 weeks. That gives us the ability to sample the biology of the ocean just by looking at the water. And we have different techniques for that. Some of them tell us individual species that are there. Some of us tell us about larger taxonomic groups. But all of them allow us to, for the first time, do something like a CTD cast to the bottom of the ocean and be able to look at the biology in the deep water near the seafloor, look especially at the microbiology of the very deep waters, and then of course plankton and so forth in surface waters. And I think that in the same way that Argo showed us structure of temperature, salinity in the ocean, and we started realizing how much was going on in the midwaters and deep waters of the ocean. These new biological techniques are going to allow us to have insights about what's going on with biology, especially with the ocean microbiome, which we've never studied in depth. And, the microbes in the ocean are sort of like the dark energy of the universe. They rule the world, they just allow us to be around because we're good hosts. The last thing that I want to emphasize is specific challenges for observation. One of the most important things for us to be able to look at is the grounding line of glaciers with the underlying sediment at the edges of Antarctica, Greenland, and so forth. We know that the glaciers are being held back by the fact that the bottom of the glacier is grounded against the seafloor. We don't know exactly what's going on there. We know that some glaciers are starting to move much more quickly. We don't know much about the processes that are controlling that, and that is absolutely essential for us to be able to look at what's going to, and be able to predict what's going to happen in terms of sea level rise. But it is one of the most challenging environments there is. Not only is it dark and cold, but in order to get there, you have to go underneath the ice sheets and get right down to the place where they're grounded. It is an enormous challenge, and there are many groups that are trying to meet this challenge with very innovative platforms and vehicles, but there's a lot going on there. It's a very dangerous environment for robotic systems as well. So I wanted to sort of expand this idea of being able to observe what we need to, being able to observe what we want to tell you about some of the big challenges that we have that I am confident that we will be able to address in the next decade. And that is going to unveil a lot about the ocean that we don't know now.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for that.
Why we need to observe the Antarctic because in relation to sea level rise.
You want to grab the phone?
It was not clear. Explain why.
Okay. Vladimir tells me that I wasn't very clear about why we needed to observe the ice sheets around Antarctica.
Trust Vladimir to say that.
Yes, he keeps me honest. The first thing is, of course, the ice sheets on Antarctica will contribute the most to sea level rise as they melt. And so it is the most important area for us to understand. I think one of the second things is that the addition of that fresh water not only causes sea level rise, but it also will be a major disruption of the circulation around Antarctica. The formation of deep water near Antarctica and the mixing of waters that then go on to other parts of the ocean. So for both the physics of the ocean and the physics of the ice sheet, understanding what's happening at the base of the ice sheet is essential. Is that better?
Margaret, thank you very much for your intervention. The two takeaways for me is one, how complex and difficult it is, but at the same time, how important that we do it. And also, something that you did not quite mention, but we will get to that in the discussion, is how costly the enterprise is. And given where we are with ocean funding, that is something that we might want to come back to discuss. Our next speaker is Katja Matthes, head of Geomar from Germany, and along with a number of other research institutions, one of the pioneers in thinking about ocean observations and then working on it. You have the floor.
Thank you, Rama. I think I have slides, so I would like to look at my slides, and maybe I can...
You can just take this. Yeah, there it is. You can just move it forward. You can come here and speak if you like.
Okay, so we've heard about the overall importance of ocean observations. Margaret talked about the challenges that we have and what we still need to measure. And I would like to take you to a couple of regions and really highlight that the regional changes are so important and how few we know. So two areas that are just examples for not so many ocean observations are the Arctic. And the Arctic is a hotspot of climate change, and we are seeing a loss of Arctic sea ice of almost 80%. So the Arctic will be ice-free in a couple of years, which will change the complete system, and it will also change our way of shipping routes, resource extraction. So we need to take care of this. So climate change is affecting or has regional and global consequences. And Margaret already talked about the lung of the ocean, so the breathing of the ocean in the Antarctic, but also in the Labrador Sea. So how much oxygen is coming from the atmosphere into the ocean and actually entering into the deep ocean is a big question, and we still don't know much about it. 2 years ago, GeoMar did a study together with Dalhousie University to show that 50% of the oxygen coming from the atmosphere goes down into the deep ocean in the Labrador Sea. But this has an effect on the biology in the ocean and on marine life. So a second hotspot for climate change is the tropical Atlantic ecosystem, which is very important for global fisheries and people. And this is one aspect that I would like to highlight, that we have to take into account local communities to do ocean observations, because they go out on their fisherman boat. They know exactly how things are changing. So having a sensor and going there is not enough, but we need the communities that are around. And also climate change is affecting biodiversity, the fisheries, fish or other marine animals. GeoMar has an outpost in the tropical Atlantic on Cabo Verde Island in Africa. So we're there since 2017 doing campaigns and measurements, and there's practically no observational network in West Africa. So there's one of the most important upwelling regions, the upwelling system bringing fresh and nutrients to the surface, feeding the fisheries there. And we have no idea. There were heat waves this summer. We have no idea because there is no measurement network. So we're planning to put sustainable management for this important ecosystem in place, and we want to do a big international campaign to look at the future of the tropical upwelling regions. We want to go for 1 year to integrate all different kinds of instruments, and this is just an example what instruments we have, and this is an international campaign involving local communities, the West African community, to understand how is this ecosystem affected by climate change. It's threat by warming, acidification and loss of oxygen, but also how will it develop and how do we manage it sustainably, and how do we put a sustainable ocean observing system in there. So I put together a few key aspects for sustainable ocean observations that are not new, but still I thought it's useful to look at it. So we need a sustained and sustainable ocean network. Coordinated measurements, Vladimir said it, in the atmosphere we have it, in the ocean we don't. It's based on project funding. We do not have a stably financed observational network, and if we want to talk about carbon removal, we need to know what the baseline is, and we don't. So we need to integrate physical, chemical, and biological data. Of course, we need fair and equitable access for interested stakeholders. We need to include regional communities as partners in the Arctic, in the tropics, everywhere, because they know the system much longer than we. And this is also to keep life and work safe and stable. a lot of the communities, a lot of big cities are at the coast, so we really depend on the ocean. So it's better to invest now in ocean observations than paying for the effects of climate change later on, which are much more much harder, and the cost will be much higher. And it's also important for inclusive and sustainable development. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks, Katya. And I think one of the things that you highlighted was your work in Cabo Verde. And one of the reasons why that is important is that most of the larger institutions of oceanography are working within their regions. And while it is important, the key aspect of the Southern Ocean, or the south of the equator, and the work on that is just as important, because we're going to hear from Pacific Ocean Commissioner Menoni later on, and we need to do more of that. And as you know, Secretary Blinken of the United States, Department of State Secretary, talked about an Atlantic initiative, covering both North and Southern Atlantic. And I know President Macron visited Brazil and then emphasized the role of Brazil in learning more about the Southern Atlantic. So the final speaker on the panel that we have is Dr. Thelma Krug. She's from Brazil, and while the previous three speakers were steeped in oceanography matters, she's steeped in climate, which is most appropriate because we are at a climate COP, and she was first a very formidable negotiator for Brazil, and then joined the IPCC, and she was vice chair of the AR6. So it gives me great pleasure to invite you to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much, Rama, and it's a pleasure to be here. And with Margaret, Vladimir, Katya, it's really very nice. But possibly a different tone or complementary to that, because when we talk about observation, and as Margaret has already singled out, some of these observations are not quite there to provide us insight into some of the applications that are urgently needed now. We are talking a lot about mitigation of climate change through carbon dioxide options. One of them is ocean fertilization. And I remember when I was really a deep negotiator here, and still the fear that some parties have in terms of talking about fertilizing the ocean, because they don't understand the extent. They don't understand potentially the implications to biodiversity, because there are several unknowns into this process. And possibly that is also due because the ocean is so big, is so unknown in many aspects, that anything that we say about the ocean raises concerns. Are we really doing the right thing to the oceans? But I wanted to highlight that, for instance, my experience, this is a little bit of my experience as negotiator and the fear that parties have with some elements that they do not know well. And they do not know well because the information doesn't come to them in the right way. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, tries to bring the updated science in all aspects. And that is quite helpful in terms of making an evaluation of the science that is over there, overall, comprehensive, open, by assessing all the literature available. And we always say that, for the developing countries, many times we don't have enough information, enough observations, enough data that provides us a comprehensive, understanding that is different from some developed countries that have more resources, that have more capacity, and so on. But one of the things that is interesting in the IPCC is that it makes the assessment of the literature, but it also highlights the gaps in knowledge. And there are several gaps in knowledge. So I could list a couple of them just to highlight for the special report that was produced during last cycle by the IPCC on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. And then, for instance, snow depth on sea ice, essentially unmeasurable. Regional gaps in knowledge of polar ecosystems and biodiversity. Critical gaps in knowledge concerning interactions between the atmosphere and the specific elements of the polar ocean and the cryosphere. Critical needs to better understand the efficacy and limits of strategies for reducing risks and strengthening resilience for polar ecosystems and people. So these are just some examples, Rama, of some highlights that IPCC says, well, we are not quite there for everything. We have, as Margaret has pointed out, we have evolved and we continuously evolve in our knowledge. But sometimes the tools are not there. As you said, some of the elements for us, the 3 elements that you have mentioned that are not quite there is an interesting thing. Now, so going from that gap, so you have those gaps, and so what? So someone has to deal with those gaps, and I think that there are several communities, oceanic communities, programs that can help on that. But more specifically, the Global Climate Observing System, which consists of 3 panels, atmospheric, terrestrial, and oceanic, it regularly and systematically produces a status report, which provides the status of observations that are missing and that potentially could be filled in by, for instance, space agencies, by data centers, by the academics, by research institutes. So there is a whole suite of potentially responsible agencies that could then help to fill in those gaps that are identified in the status report. But the status report, it just identifies the observation gaps, or data needs. But then we move into an implementation plan. Somebody has to, try to fill in those data needs and those observation gaps. So implementation plan follows the status plan and assign the responsibilities more, not necessarily for a single agency, but identifies the most responsible agency for taking over that specific data gap through an action that is needed. One concern that I would like to raise that we have, there are several concerns. I think that one of them is basically the sustainability of observations. So some of the space agencies provide data for a long time, but those observations are not necessarily sustained through time and are not replaced by something that could, complement adequately the time series that we have constructed for a long time. Another issue, Rama, that I would like to highlight is that not necessarily data is shared. You have lots of data out there that are not shared, and this limits our ability, like Katja was saying about creating a baseline. For creating a baseline, you need to have a long time series to understand the trend. And then if you don't have that, it makes it very difficult for us to understand and monitor if we are enhancing resilience, if we are reducing vulnerability, if we are increasing the adaptive capacity of ecosystems. So we do have some issues that we try to highlight, we try to overcome. It is not the availability of data, but availability of free data to all, because that is essential for us to really have a more comprehensive view of the climate system as a whole. The ocean is part of the climate system that interacts with the atmosphere, with the, through the coastal zone, which is one of the concerns that we have, specifically because a coastal zone is something that you can measure because it's there. It's within, let's say, the limits of the national boundaries. the open sea has no national boundaries, which makes it much more complicated. So we do have knowledge, as we say in the IPCC, possibly best knowledge from 0 to 700 meters in the ocean. But the deep ocean is still very costly, very difficult. And because of this vast immensity of the ocean, understanding it comprehensively is a challenge to all. So these are my preliminary remarks. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you very much, Hilma. Very helpful. And in fact, if you were here in the previous panel that Commissioner Manoni had organized, we had several leaders, the President of Palau, the Prime Minister from Fiji, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, all here, basically echoing what you said about the importance of the ocean in terms of the climate system. Something that we at the Ocean Pavilion are here to really make that come true, because one of the often mentioned things is that while ocean has that outsized influence on climate system, the climate agreement doesn't talk about that as much, and so that's what we're trying to do. Now we have about 15 minutes for discussion, and I have several questions here, so I'm trying to see how to be most efficient about it. So what I thought I would do is I would combine them all into one larger question, and you can choose what you want to address, from that. And the big question is really, what do we know? What do we need to know? How will we know when we know enough to act? And then the important part, both in terms of what Katya said and Thelma had said, is co-designing it. How do we make sure that it's not just an exercise by the rich countries and bringing the developing countries? Because ultimately the question is, if you do all this, what are you doing this for? And how are you going to address the problems that the countries have? Who would like to go first? I mean, you can pick anything that you want to pick from that. Vladimir.
Thank you. I think for me, the best way to answer this important question would be simply to quote from the State of the Ocean report that IOC first published in 2022. It was a pilot report. I wrote the executive summary for this, and I read all the elements, of all the sections of that report, and my clear understanding of what was the situation was the following. So in principle, we understand what is happening in the ocean in general terms, because we are scientists, because we more or less observe the ocean, and also we're able through science to understand certain processes and so we have a picture. But in terms of quantitative description of the ocean that is needed to turn our knowledge into action, I think this is drastically incomplete. So more quantitative information about the state of the ocean is the mainstream development for ocean observations, and we have to find all ways of designing this, supporting this, sustaining this, but we more or less understand what needs to be done. And we have all the elements, just how we package this all together is the bigger issue.
I'll comment on co-design because I think when there's an organization of all of the major and minor oceanographic institutions around the world called the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean. And all of our members from the developing world complain that the cost of observation is so great that it limits their ability to participate in observation. And because they're limited, the observation around their countries is limited. And that has led to a lot of discussion about the development of lower cost sensors. And, if we went to name, your most prestigious physical oceanographer or mine, and they would say, we must have CTDs with this level of accuracy and precision because the variations in the ocean are so small, and we can recite it, and many of you have heard it as well. But earlier this week, we had a discussion where we explored the idea that perhaps we should be thinking about two types of observation instrumentation. One that was research grade observation instrumentation, and another that was fit for purpose for many other kinds of needs. So if you're not working in the middle of the deep ocean, 2,000, 3,000 meters, the temperature variations are so great that you don't need that research grade of capability. So POGO has started talking about this, and has also started talking about what would be the sort of the balance point between something for basic oceanographic sensors that would work in coastal zones or near shore, and where could we get the price point to be low enough for that sensor that anybody could have one. So I think that this is another challenge of our observation system. And in meteorology, Thelma, I believe that there are, you have sort of research grade meteorological observation stations, and then others that are good enough for what you need, but maybe not good enough for atmospheric physics research. And I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I would like to follow on Margaret's remarks on the co-design, but also on the small sensors that can go on sailing ships, on container ships. 95% of the traffic is on other ships than research vessels. So we are developing a sensor, a small sensor that can be put on all these ships, and the Vendée Globe is just going on, and one of the sailors, Boris Herrmann, has a pack of ocean observations on board. We just need to have an increase of the number of observations, and we will not reach this. I completely agree with the best high precision research data. We also need this, no question, but we need this more broad and covering of the ocean. And then the study our campaign that I showed in West Africa, I think we need more of this. We need co-design studies. We need to go to the ocean. We need to measure the ocean, not only in the deep ocean. We need to measure it at the coast with fishermen. We need to give fishermen little sensors and really have a big campaign together with the communities, with West Africa, and this is what Futuro will do in 2028, hopefully. We're still planning the campaign, and we're just doing this co-design workshop with West African communities in order to really do this together. And I think we need to take the developing countries, the southern countries, into the boat and do more together.
Katja, I mean, the point that you make is a very important one, that you use the ships that are out there, put the sensors on them. But isn't it true that most commercial ships follow a particular lane? And so what about the rest of the ocean? And the question, the reason I'm asking that is not to say don't use that facility, but isn't it time, if this is really of that importance, that the governments come together and then say that, well, we need to have ocean observation system across the board, and this is the cost. I mean, when you put it in dollars and cents, it is still significantly lower than what we're doing with outer space.
Oh, yeah. So, no, we need both, right? So we need the cruise ships or the container ships, and yes, they are going on routes, on restricted routes, but we've done a study where you can slightly change the routing, and it doesn't harm the time that you need for the traffic, but it helps to measure other parts of the ocean if you change the tracks a bit. But of course, we need governments to pay for a sustainable ocean observation network. The ships are going on the surface. they go a little bit into the deep, but we need the moored observations at significant locations in the North Atlantic, in the tropical Atlantic, in the South Atlantic, and for this we need governments to give money.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, Rama, you asked, what do we know about the ocean? We know a lot. We know a lot, and we know the role of the ocean for the climate system, right? In terms of sequestering almost 30% of the CO2 in the atmosphere every year. We don't know how it is going to continue to sequester at this percentage as we have increased the levels of temperature. So that is an unknown that I would say. We also know many things. One of the things that is coming up, and it's of a concern, and I think that Katya is touching a little bit on that. Some of the communities that rely on their livelihoods rely on fishing, for instance. Some fishing communities are not finding those fishes anymore. Either the fishes are not being adapted to the temperature and are shifting somewhere else, or they are just dying. So they are not being adaptive to the new conditions. So that is, to me, an enormous concern, and in particular for developing countries who, for many communities depend on that. Now, one of the issues that I find in terms of developing countries, if we may say like that, is I don't see how we can progress together if we don't engage, through the research foundations. I see the role of research foundations as being instrumental for us. And I'm going to give an example, for instance, FAPESP, which is the largest research funding agency in São Paulo, together with CNRS from France, has now established this research institute at the University of São Paulo. And then one of the pillars for the institute is just ocean. And just to create the engagement with other communities to work together. And then we can also put more money together. So it's not coming from one single institution, but it's coming from several. And not only in the issue of financing, but also in the issue of us exchanging, because what happens possibly in the Pacific Ocean is not necessarily similar to what happens in the Atlantic, in the South Atlantic, in Antarctica, which is one of the programs that we're now developing in Brazil. So I find it essential that we engage, that we identify the communities that have the similar interests in terms of ocean research. And so these are some elements that I would like to raise in my concern with communities.
Thank you very much, Thelma, for that. And I think what you have said is really phenomenal. I mean, Brazil, not only because of its presidency of the G20, but with what FAPESP is doing, and you're a board member of FAPESP, and to identify ocean as a key element and investing money in that is great. But this is called the Finance COP, and we are talking about finances. I'd like to hear from the rest of you if there is a dollar figure associated with what it takes to do ocean observations, at least to get, if not a consistent over a period of time, to get a minimum baseline. For example, in the case of mapping the ocean flow, Craig McLean testified before the Congress saying that, well, United States should invest $3 billion. And from his point of view, Global, that's right. No. He was making the case that the United States should invest, the total cost is $3 billion. United States can itself do that. And it's so important for the United States to do that. Our calculations were a little higher. From the seabed 2030, we thought it's $5 billion. But is there a number like that that you can share? Any one of you? Yeah, Vladimir. That's it.
To maintain the system, we need $500 million annually.
Okay.
Yeah. I just miserably failed to respond to your first question because, in IOC, we recently developed a new data policy that facilitates exchange on the basis of a licensing that costs nothing. So that is going to install much better order in the data exchange system. And also would like to say that that system already has around 100 data centers nationally in 100 countries of the world. So the things are moving in the right direction.
Okay, great.
Someone can correct me if I'm a little off, but I think that the annual cost of maintaining the existing Argo system is about $50 million a year. So the number that you gave would be
10 times.
the entire observation system.
Okay. So we're settling on 500. So, Katya, want to increase it, decrease it?
That would be a good starting point, I would say.
Okay. I mean, can you imagine this? $500 million is all it takes to get a baseline of the ocean observations, and we are struggling. I mean, this is really not a good statement in terms of the priority that the world community gives. You want to add to that?
No, I don't want to put a guess here.
Right, of course.
Yeah. Although, Rama, we do identify for, the data needs and gaps, we do identify specific ranges for what would cost
Yeah.
to fill in that observation gap or the data, specific action. And but I wouldn't guess what it would
No,
take
understood.
comprehensively.
Thank you. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, Manoni, to come and take the stage and offer us some few concluding remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity to join this event and listen to some of the challenges that are impacting upon the ocean and the work that we need to do to overcome the impacts of climate change, ocean, and sustain a livelihood. I mean, it's good to see climate and ocean together in the same room. Why don't we get oceans on the agenda? I understand the challenges, but the question is how long do we need to wait for before we start moving on the ocean? I mean, as you say, there are a few things we know already about the ocean and what we need to do. So I think that itself is a challenge. Our hope was that the work on climate also track along the ocean's part of the work. Otherwise, from my viewpoint, if we do all of these things on climate to adapt and recover, and then the science will tell us in the future that we are going in the wrong direction, at least with respect to what we find out about the ocean. Then it's going to be another challenge, another hurdle to overcome. But despite that, I think there is a silver lining in what we hear. I think there is the key is knowledge. The key is the elephant in the room, the finance that needs to support the global effort in humanity's endeavor towards this. From the perspective of the Pacific, it is indeed a challenge, no doubt about that. But speaking from the perspective of capacity, in terms of human capacity as well as resources, in terms of the ability to properly observe our part of the ocean. So the support is needed, and of course to all our friends and institutions and partners that are here today could contribute to allowing that. But by the same token, I think we should not underestimate the relevance and the usefulness of traditional knowledge in observing these systems. I think that is also, I'd say, an element of observation that science should also consider, because for us who have lived in the ocean for millennia, some things are not taught. Some things are just ingrained in the system because that's the livelihood and that's the area and the geography that we are much more familiar with. But certainly capacity. For instance, the other day there was in another side event a call for a resource, a regional fund to support science research so that the Pacific Pacific scientists themselves can contribute to reports like the IPCC report that comes out every now and then on the state of the climate. Because when you don't contribute to a report, you take the report with a pinch of salt, if I may say, unless you are contributing to the report that comes out of the UNFCCC Secretariat every year. So, but look, this has been a very eye-opening session from all the experts today, Rama, and just pleased to be part of this conversation on behalf of the Pacific. I think we will learn a lot from this session and the other sessions that are going on the other side of the pavilion. But thank you very much for the opportunity to share.
Don't go. The one last point I want to mention is that, first of all, thank you, Commissioner, for being here and for your comments. And what we want to do is not just limit it to this kind of a panel discussion, but to have a concrete proposal of what it takes for ocean observations, and then present that at the UN Ocean Conference. And then we want to take that also subsequently to the next COP in Belém, and ensure that we have the funds necessary to do that. And there will be, we will bring all the leading ocean observations institutions to Woods Hole in March, and then have the proposal ready, and we look forward to your continued guidance in that effort. With that, we conclude this session, and thank you very much for your attention. And we should have a group photograph here. Commissioner.